Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Psych636 recorded lecture for chapters 5 and 7. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to refer to the book a little bit. I have the slides here. I think for this particular chapter, the slides are prompts, which is good for you when you're studying, because once you've read the chapter, you really want the slides to be more of a prompt so that there's extra sort of mental effort to recall it, and that information always gets learned better when you're saying, okay, there was that, and it was from the chapter, it was about this or that. But I am going to refer to the book a little bit because I think the slides don't provide enough information, at least for a recorded lecture kind of thing. So we'll start off with the Carl Rogers person-centered, used to be called client-centered, and you'll see it referred to as that therapy and approach. They call it client-centered therapies because they throw in motivational interviewing. So I'm going to spend some time. The chapter's a little bit heavy in terms of some of the wording. I don't find it that helpful. So you're going to see me refer to the book a little bit off and on here. But I'm going to start off with the book. So here's his history. Again, it's kind of important to know if you become a counselor and a little about these people. So he lived to be 85. But like for all these chapters and all these theories and therapy approaches, you kind of know what is the way that they conceptualize how humans operate, right? How the mind works. How does the mind go wrong? And then what's curative, as I've mentioned this in our discussion groups. So those are the three things you always want to think about in terms of a frame for what you're supposed to be remembering and learning. Okay? Now for what is it you're supposed to, how do humans operate? That's usually in this book called the theory of personality. So kind of a broad definition of personality in a sense. All right? So let's start with Carl Rogers here and his basic theory. So I'm going to refer to the book a little bit because I want to use some of the phrases they use. And this is real. The slides are really boiled down, particularly for this. So keep in mind, too, as we move on here, that there are certain themes. A lot of them relate back to Freud. So what is Rogers' notion of what is inherent or what we're born with drives? Nothing like the Freud stuff. Right? So for them, and this is the beginning of, I think the beginning of the humanistic movement. Okay? So the overall picture here is that we are born not with negative drives, but with positive drives. So, Adler was one of the first people to say, it's not all, sex and aggression. But very clearly here is the start of they're really very positive drives that we have. So to give you a quick summary, in my mind, my interpretation is Freud said that we have all these negative drives, right, that society helps us tame in a sense. All right? Society, as represented by our parents, helps us control those negative drives. And the humanistic people felt that we're born with these positive drives that society, as represented by our parents, but also in other ways, not just our parents, but society messes up our meeting of those needs and the drives. All right, so it's a flip. It's a complete flip. Negative drives controlled by society. Positive drives inhibited by society. So starting to get real opposite of the Freudian approaches here. But there's still some touches of it. You know, and you see in the chapter references to defenses, things you're not aware of, the subception thing. It's almost like these people just could not let go of the Freud. Maybe they were feeling like they were going to betray him or something. So anyway, the basic motivating force is actualization. And you should think about whatever little stuff you may have gotten in intro psych, if abnormal class, where this is the humanistic experiential people. So you're born with a basic drive to kind of be the best person you can be, for all this potential to be creative or do things that are satisfying, but in a positive way, to reach your fullest potential as a human being, right? I mean, I'm sure there's better definitions, but that's kind of my little frame on it. All right, that's called actualization. And you remember your little Maslow pyramid of all the things that prevent you, or the needs you have to get met first before you can actually actualize yourself, all right, or become actualized. So actualization is to meet physiological needs, to expand ourselves through growth and reproduction. And we are born with this kind of, and I will use the word drive, right, just to relate it to some of the other stuff you've been hearing. So now they jump to the conditions of worth, but there's some heavy stuff between that and that. So I just want to talk about it a little bit. Because they also use the term organismic. Yeah, I want to make sure I put the N in there. The organismic valuing, right? That we have this natural. This is a natural thing that we sort of know what's good for us in terms of actualization. All right? We're born with actualizing forces that motivate us and that value processes that regulate us. So we know what's good for us, right? We know that if we're mad, we're not supposed to hit people. And, we know when a relationship is a positive, nurturing one, or an experience is a positive one that helps us grow, learn, meet our needs, physiological or, growth, right? That we have an inherent, inborn knowledge of what's good for us, what they technically call, there's a lot of technical language in this chapter for something that's, very Rogerian. There's a lot of technical terms. So that's a very important little thing there, okay? We can trust that these basic organismic processes will serve us well, okay? Now the next phrase here is critical because it relates to some of the stuff we talked about in our discussion class. That we respond not to some sort of pure reality, but rather to reality as we experience it. Our world is experienced, or our phenomenal world, the phenomena as we experience them. So that's when you see that term phenomenological. It means it's about how we experience it, right? How does the phenomena, how do we feel it? Okay, it's not about what the reality is. Like the behavior is the reality is. You got reinforced, not reinforced. You got, unconditional stimulus. There's no like how we experience it stuff. But if we wish to understand our particular actions, we have to try to place themselves in our internal frame of reference. Become conscious of the world as it exists within our subjective awareness. All right, just so how we experience the world, not actually what the world does, but how we experience it. So then there's a phrase, I do want to say this, As part of our actualizing tendency, we also begin to actively differentiate, to see the difference between our experiences that are part of our own body and functioning in those that belong to others. That's some real basic, like, infant development stuff. The special experiences that we come to own are self-experiences. We become conscious of self-experiences by representing these experiences symbolically in language or other symbols. This representation and awareness of, I mean, to me, if you don't understand what that means, that's okay. Okay? That should not be a negative experience for you. They need to be more specific, to be a little more down to earth about what that means. So there's a few paragraphs like that. I just, I mean, I think I know what it means, but I'm not sure that I know exactly what that means. So they get a little bit heavy in some of the writing here. But self-concept is an important concept because it's going to relate to how we end up with problems. Okay, so our self-concept includes our perceptions of what is characteristic of I, of me. All right, also our perceptions of our relationship to others, to the world, and the values we associate with them. Okay, so that's important. So as our self-consciousness, I guess that means self-awareness, we need to develop a positive regard for that self that we have created, right? So the point of all that is our self-concept and what is considered experiences that we want, whether we get experiences that our organismic valuing says are good for us or not, that it sometimes then becomes conditional, all right, and that relates to the conditions of worth. So the positive regard is a need, right? So we want to have positive regard, but you really want to be okay with who you are is going to be the main point of the Rogers stuff, okay? As it is, I think, for the Gestalt stuff too, and some of the other things, all right? So positive regard from others becomes compelling, but, all right, the point here is you're not getting unconditional positive regard from the outside world, your parents, people, whatever, okay? And you can have experiences then that start to affect you, all right, in your self-concept. And so what they say here is, to me, a sentence that's very important. Others' expression of positive regard can become more compelling than internal organismic valuing, which just means that that part of you that knows what's good for you, you start to ignore that because regard from others is so powerful. I almost said reinforcing. Okay? So to me, that's a key sentence that ties a lot of this stuff together, if this is making sense. All right? And then even more importantly, this next sentence, which I like, when that occurs, individuals begin to guide their behavior not by the degree to which an experience maintains or enhances the organism, the tendency towards actualization, that inner part of you that knows the organismic valuing thing, that knows what's good or not for you. All right? So we guide our behavior not by that internal compass, but the likelihood of receiving love and affection, attention, maybe even from others. Okay? And then, so what happens is you regard yourself in the same way that you experience regard from other people. So some of the other models might say you're shutting off that part of you that is going to tell you what's good for you, as opposed to, well, I'm going to get positive attention from this person, as opposed to maybe I need to do something else, do something alone, or say something, or do something that's going to negate that positive regard from somebody. And that's more of a growth, it would be more of a healthy growth thing, right? Healthy. But instead, I'm going to give that up because I'm going to get the regard instead. Okay? So then what happens is you have conditions of worth, and that you only can feel good about yourself under certain conditions. And that's not a whole person, right? That's not completely who you are. You are no longer who you should be or could be. For the humanistic people, it's more about who you could be, right? And instead, it's conditional whether you're a good person, all right? You do not regard yourself as positively as worthy unless you live according to the conditions, right? And in your family, it might be you don't say certain things. You're not assertive. You don't express your emotions, right? That stuff you don't get attention for. You get negatives from. You get criticism from. You get hurtful or hurtful. Let's just say that. All right, there are other phrases here. So instead of being guided by your own values, you become guided by the values of other people. Okay? So once that starts to happen, you're going to have problems. So the more conditional the parents' love, in other words, the more that it depends on you acting a certain way, right? Because if conditional versus unconditional, which is where the unconditional positive regard. Parents can still love you. They can correct you. But the point is, you don't want them to use corrective techniques or interactions with you where they're withdrawing love. Okay? Where instead of, they don't want me to do this, so I got timed out or whatever. All right. But you never question their love for you, or that's never brought up or comes up as something, oh, maybe they don't love me if I don't do this or if I do this. Okay? So there becomes this incongruence between what you experience and your self-concept. So he gives the example of his own, where his self-concept is to be a good person, you don't express anger towards other people. Right? Now that's a very anti-organismic, I know I'm going to say that wrong, organismic valuing thing. There's a conflict between that, right, and the experience. So the experience of anger versus who you are. I'm not someone who can be angry. It's not okay to be angry. So I've seen this other places, and they don't frame it here the way I've seen it. One other place, which is it's almost between who you are, your ideal self, and who you actually are. And you want to kind of narrow that gap because it's kind of idealized that you never get angry. It's my interpretation of it in that model of what I heard, a version of the Rogers model, right? That you want to bring that gap. If you're not acting in ways, or you're having lots of experiences that don't fit your concept because there's a big incongruence, or think of a line with two poles between your idealized self and your real self. You want to be your real self. And I think real self means the real self who is following the judgment of their organismic valuing processes. In other words, I know what's healthy for me internally. Somewhere deep down there, I really do know. That's quite a concept, really. Right? So a divided personality, lack of wholeness means you're doing things in ways that don't feel right to you because your self-concept's been kind of warped in a sense. All right? I'm just trying to use some other terms, ways you could think about that I don't think would be bad. And it's interesting that they bring up, defenses that are Freudian, right? Because you don't want threatening experience to come into awareness. So, I'm angry. I'm not supposed to be angry. What do I do with that? That's terrible. So it brings up a lot of distress, anxiety, whatever. So you have to somehow do something with the experience, or again, your interpretation of the experience. And you can do some classic Freudian defenses. They mention a few in here that you can do to try to deal with that incongruence, because the incongruence raises distress. Okay? I like that. So I hope that makes sense. I might hit on some of the defenses, but I'm gonna have you do that. I'm gonna comment on a few things. So therapeutic relationship is healing. And what Roger said, which a lot of people don't buy in the cognitive behavioral world, I don't buy it, is that just a therapeutic relationship by itself is healing. In other words, it's necessary, it's a necessary condition to be healed, and it's also sufficient. This is a scientific phrase. It's like a plant. It's necessary that a plant has water to grow. That plant's not going to grow without water. I know you're thinking of plants that don't need water, but anyway, just think of a plant that generally needs water, just a typical plant. So a necessary condition for a plant to grow is water. Is it sufficient? Is it enough? No, but it's necessary. You can't grow without the water, but it's not enough. So he felt like all you need to do is provide a therapeutic relationship setting, and that had to happen, and it was enough. So cognitive behavioral people say, like me, say it's necessary to have a very good therapeutic relationship, but you've got to do other things. It's not sufficient for someone to heal. You've got to do cognitive behavioral type things with them, and I hope that makes sense. And we've talked about genuineness, congruence, right? How you feel and how you're acting match, right? So you can see now the ties between incongruence as a concept, congruence in therapy. Again, the author brought up the example. It was in a state of incongruence when he was feeling angry, and his self-concept said that's not good, right? You're not going to get, maybe came from not getting positive self-regard, a positive external regard from people. It's not okay. He wasn't listening to his inner compass, the organismic valuing thing, all right? But if you provide that positive regard that's unconditional, you can make mistakes and I still love you and care about you and value you and see you as a worthy human being. And that the other thing you have to do is use accurate empathy. Okay? So I hope that makes sense. So between self and experience is a little different than the model I just told you about. Ideal self and real self. Right? But you want to increase that congruence between who I am and what I'm experiencing. Right? Oh, I'm sad right now. Oh, never supposed to be sad. It's a sign of weakness. You know, that kind of, where you learn that through somebody setting up where, you know, you being a worthy, good person, worthy of love, was conditional on you not feeling certain things, right? And you help people be okay with that or change their self-concept. Like, you know, it's okay for you to be angry. People will still care about you. You're still a good person. The inner compass is okay with that. The organismic valuing process is like, yep, you can be angry. You're angry. Okay? So you want to create an atmosphere where you can help people sort of face these things. Again, a little Freudian here. Some of this stuff's unconscious. And I've seen this, and these are good examples too, where, you know, you can say certain things. This reflective listening is almost like a way people suddenly, this relates to the catharsis, have insight into their self-concept that they have not wanted to experience. You know, and they feel so sad because they were told they couldn't be angry, and they remember their dad yelling at them or something, and they suddenly realize, you know, what's making stuff. They realize the incongruence, the two pieces, and where it came from. So what's healing, what's curative, is a combination of making people aware. Reflective listening helps people see sort of connections between things. I'm just using general terms now of things I've already made specific points about. And a corrective emotional experience, which is basically you're going to be in the room with somebody who gives you unconditional positive regard. So that's called a corrective emotional experience. It's kind of like I talk about when we talk about termination with clients. You want to give them a corrective emotional experience of how to say goodbye without a lot of trauma, drama, guilt. It's going to be sad. And there's not going to be negative stuff other than just what it feels like, which is sad, right? Or scary. So termination would be, the way I've coached you about how to do termination, it can be a corrective emotional experience. A lot of clients have not had positive separations from people, right? Therapists control the process of therapy, and then facilitative conditions are genuineness, positive regard, and reflective listening. Okay? And then they talk about how all this stuff plays out in these different areas. I'm not sure about that button thing, but anyway, so ideal individual. The ideal individual should be the individual who you are. And if the individual who you are is not ideal to you, because you're trying to be ideal, right? In a sense, to you, ideal person is acting in ways that gets them external positive regard. That's not the best way to be. The ideal person should be you always acting on your internal drive to be the best person you can be, right? Not live your best life. I hate that phrase because to me that's all about just being happy. And I don't think that's what life's about. You want to do things that you fulfill your potential and do things that mean things to you, to relate it to the other chapter, that gives life meaning. And that can be a stressful life. It can be a life that you're not happy every day because you do things that are difficult. But they give your life meaning and your potential. You feel like you're really being the person you want to be and not just have a life that's really nice. Anyway, so I'm sure some of you will yell at me about, well, that's not really what it means. But you know what? Having a certain kind of dining room and, going down and feeding the homeless once a week, that's not, is that your best life? Is that a best life? No. I think most people have inside them an urge, positive urge to really improve the world. And living your best life, I don't think includes addressing that stuff. Anyway, so efforts to enhance trainees' empathy can result in stealth technique. Yeah, so the book goes on about Rogers saying, wish he had never used the term reflection of feeling. But the point is, when you do it right, it's very powerful. So what happens is, and I think that's what they relate to in the book. Some people just are natural at this. The empathic listening stuff, where you say the most insightful comment about where that person's coming from, right? So the person says, well, I another job lost, it's terrible, I'm upset. And you say, it seems like, your whole life you've tried to be someone and you feel like a failure. And the person's like, that kind of natural, seeing what the real meaning is, where I've tried to coach you guys on reflective listening about meaning, not just the feeling, but the meaning of the feeling. What is it, the situation? What does it mean to them? Why do they feel that way? So that's all that is. I don't know why there's so much drama in this chapter about that. So they go over MI, which I'm not going to go over here, because you should know MI really well at this point. So this should all seem familiar to you. Lot of research on it, although at the end they make a big point about the longer term effects may not be as strong, what they call durable, they last as long. I like that whole discussion about effective with ethnic minority and resistant clients. Well, it was designed for resistant clients. I don't even like to use that word. So anyway, so there's this whole thing with the critiques, of course, which should make sense to you. And there's ways to integrate this with CBT, and we can talk about this if you want. But when you do see, so this is my model is basically a Rogerian basis in terms of a powerful relationship with your client, and then you can do technique-y stuff. So you can do MI stuff before therapy just to make sure everybody's pretty clear about what they need to change and has moved up the stages of change. And you can do it when people start to struggle in therapy, looking for therapeutic ruptures, because that means they may be ambivalent about change. So that's when you throw it in at the middle. So, and you could do a little bit all the way along the line with it. But there's different ways, there's chapters you can read about how, and a manual. Some of these were assignments that I gave in the previous version of this class that I took out for our current one. So, so that's that. So we're going to go on to chapter 7. Okay, so one of the things I want to mention, I tried to pull this up, and I'm having some trouble on my laptop. I think it's my graphics, the driver actually. I cannot find one. That Firefox is having problems with my graphics card, I guess. And apparently my laptop is so old and of the wrong type that there's no updated driver for it. So some of my graphic stuff is weird. But there's a famous videotape. Now, you've had Pearls and Rogers now. There's a famous series that they filmed, 1965, where the same client got a session with Carl Rogers, then a session with Fritz Perls, I don't know the order, and also a session with the cognitive, the rational emotive therapy guy, right? So, Ellis. So, it's fascinating. You're going to see them, especially the Pearls one, which I just watched again for a few minutes of it anyway, and you're going to see all the concepts come out. So I'd encourage you to watch that. Just all you have to do is type in YouTube Gloria case, Rogers or Pearls or whatever. There's one video where the audio is a little out of sync where they show all three of the sessions, but you can look them up individually on YouTube. But the case is Gloria, and Carl Rogers does a session with her. The whole session, she's a real client. I think it's just one session, and then one session with Fritz Perls, and then she does another one with Albert Ellis. You've got to see the Pearls one, because you guys brought up some points about therapeutic alliance and clients being mad. Anyway, so I'm not going to have to get into too deeply the interpersonal therapies. Pretty basically well laid out, not a lot of heavy-duty philosophy behind it. A little bit. So this all, again, 70s. So you see we're starting to go up in time a little bit. We'll go back in time a little with the behavioral, at least for the start of that. But this, this stuff, where it came from, in terms of who's reacting to who, and, seems to be almost a little separate thing from all those people who were trying to say Freud was terrible, right? So the humanistic people are saying, oh, Freud's got it completely backwards. We've got good internal, natural, inborn drives. And then people reacting to each of that stuff. So this seemed to be like a little separate thing. To me, anyway. I have to go over the history again. So I talk about these people, the treatment manual for interpersonal therapy. Very popular, very effective. And as they say here, it's not a detailed theory of personality. You've just got to change the way you're handling certain kinds of things, right? So that you may have certain patterns for how you deal with certain situations, right? So they're looking to alter interpersonal patterns, healthy relationships early in life, predispose you to healthy healthy relationships later in life. Yeah. Okay. Good. I mean, it's good. I like it. I mean, you can be an IPT therapist. You're not going to be required to know a whole lot about, some sort of deep philosophical psychology background or a lot of science behind it. All right. They did do a lot of research on it. I'm not saying this was like simple stuff necessarily, but I mean, complicated stuff can be things that are complicated things. Doesn't mean that they're smarter, right? It's just more complicated. So your relationships affect your mood. Mood affects relationships. Interpersonal disruption causes and results from depression, and disorders surface when situational stressors expose your inability to cope because of your poor patterns of reaction, behavior, and all that. So they basically broke down how people have problems into 4 major categories, right? You have interpersonal problems, right? These are all different types. So you have losses, right? So one major category is you have losses, and you do certain things for the certain category, right? And one is interpersonal loss, right? The second one is disputes. They gave a good case example there. Incompatible expectations of a relationship. All right. So there's some disagreements that probably boil down to people's expectations. I mean, it's very elegant, right, in terms of simple but meaningful. All right, very elegant. Because once you have this model in your head, you start listening for certain things. Like any model, as you're working on your paper, any model, you start listening for certain things. So in a dispute, you start listening for expectations. Like, oh yeah, well that's why they're having disputes. Transitions, and what I don't know why they didn't put it in the slides, usually phrased as role transitions, right? Shifting from, just dating to maybe you're a parent all of a sudden. So it can be a lot of different things other than the job stuff. I don't know about these slides. The deficits, all right? So that you don't have you have trouble maintaining relationships, okay? Yeah, so the technical role transitions is the way and it's in the book that way. So loss and grief, role disputes, which boils on expectations, and role transitions. So, and then the interpersonal deficits, people tend to be isolated. They don't really know how to have relationships. Suppose you're trying maybe, or you're pretty good, and it's not about, you may have certain expectations that don't really get you in trouble with a lot of relationships, but in certain ones it does. So they tend to be a different group, and just read that little section. We're explaining a little difference between when's an interpersonal deficit versus a role dispute. Okay, I think that's pretty clear. So IPT is time limited, it's focused, it's about current relationships, you don't go into the past too much. It's always about interpersonal, how you're handling dealing with other people. And I actually believe that mental health generally is interpersonal, right? I mean, if you were alone in a jungle somewhere for 10 years or alone on an island, how much would that mental health problem prevent you from surviving? I think it all comes from how we relate to other people. Social at a very basic level. So anyway, side comment. It's about improving relationships. It's not about insight. Well, I'm sure insight helps. It's not about defenses. They focus more, and it's a little more modern thing. We're going to cover solution-focused therapy. Fascinating stuff, completely theoryless, but great techniques. They disagree with some of these things I'm saying, but I believe them. So anyway, but these, you learn how to cope. You don't fix some sort of basic problem. All right. I think with the interpersonal definition, it's a little harder to stretch that definition, but maybe they do. So um, so therapeutic processes, consciousness raising. Again, it's not some like Eastern philosophy thing. It's you just become more aware of what you're doing, why you're doing it, and here it's not so much why you're doing it as it's not helpful. Catharsis, usual meaning to that is you get some emotional experience that is a little release of emotion that's healthy. Conditional stimuli predominate. Um, I think what that means is that knowing when to say this and when not to say this. When you're dealing with other people, it depends on what's going on and what you do or say. You do or say things in some situations you wouldn't do in others. But that's like that flexibility is people who are good relating to other people. They know when to say certain things and who to say them to or not. So short-term present-oriented therapy, focus on the primary problem, one of those 4 areas, right? You basically come up, your diagnosis is which area is your primary problem, right? No ideological hesitation to use medication. So I'm not sure what this is all about. I mean, I read the chapter. I've known this stuff a little bit before. I'm familiar with this stuff from before, but apparently they felt like you should treat it like a medical problem, which to me is loaded and not in a good way. But it seems to what they think when the patient's in a sick role, they might more see things as a treatment. Like I have this problem I need to fix, right? So they don't emphasize that in the slides, I don't think. We'll see. But that sick role thing is you have to say, you know what, you have a problem. You could take the sick role, you get medication, especially with the depression. So it's a weird combination of medical model and psychology, where they're almost integrated. All right, and I think the sick role term is part of that. So focus on recovery, not character change. So you're not going at deep issues that you have. All right, incongruence, where that came from. You're not living out your positive actualizing drives because your mother used to yell at you. There's none of that. Okay, it's like, what do you have to do? What do you have to learn? All right, provides protective immersion. All right, so then they talk about different areas where this stuff shows. So when are you just adjusted versus you're really, being who you are. I'm not sure they'd use that language. All right, so you notice it's the same in these slides. It's the same little things. It's like I think they follow the titles in the book. All right, so you're a patient advocate. You're not a neutral commenter. So that's clearly a little shot at Roger's stuff, right? Therapist assumes the expert role. Let me tell you what your problem is and what you need to do. Does that fit with MI? More Carl Rogers type stuff? No. You have to do, and you be careful when you do cognitive behavioral therapy of doing it Rogerian style. And you never just want to come across as, well, I know what's best for you. You say, this is the way I think, and then at different points you say, so what you're telling me is this. I'm wondering, you say, this could be helpful if we did this, as opposed to, all right, so this is your problem. This is what's going to be helpful. There's not much discussion here of that collaborative role. They don't care about your reaction. Transference, all that stuff. Empathy and warmth, but not unconditional acceptance. A little bit like the Pearls stuff, I think. We got Pearls. He's not going to be accepting of your negative parts. Okay. So if you're going to do this, you might like not having any theoretical attachment. I don't. It's horrendous to me. But in terms of my ability to do it, I love having this clear model of conceptualizing how things occur and why, because I think the cause has to be related to the treatment. And some people believe that it doesn't matter what the cause is, but I have a different view of that. And that's it. So transactional analysis is this thing, as the book makes a reference, it's not as popular as it used to be. Right? It's not as popular as it used to be. These books by I just blanked on his name, but were very popular. You know, some millions of copies. So people really like this transactional analysis, script oriented. And the thing that I don't think was emphasized in the chapter that I've seen emphasized when this is discussed is the nature of messages you get that you try to follow and you keep trying to follow in childhood. So we'll see if they mention them here. That you have a parent, child, and adult, and they give examples of that. And that you express certain parts of these at different times. Now, it's not always bad to be one of these or the other. It's the timing. That's my sense of this stuff, right? It's the timing. So yeah, injunctions is the term for that kind of, don't feel good, don't be happy. That we get certain messages in childhood. So anyway, but you can be impulsive and stimulus bound, like whatever's going on, you're going to react to, as opposed to what's really good. The adult person, usually is the more effective one in whatever situation you're dealing with. But there's a time to be each one, right? Parent, child, and adult. It's funny, I've just been interpreting some of my behavior or other people's behavior in terms of that, like what part is coming out, all right? Overt social meanings, covert psychological meanings. Yeah, it was interesting about the transactions, and they give an example. Some people are going to say it borders on is actually kind of sexist, but anyways, woman is interested in the guy, and she asks him to come up to her room, and so there's a sort of unspoken sexual tone to this, right? In terms of how they're interacting, what parts of them are coming out, and then what happens is the switch. What they mean is that you switch, whether you're a parent, child, or adult, all of a sudden, and then certain payoffs occur when you switch on somebody, as that character goes from child, because they're both acting like young teenagers, I guess. And then all of a sudden, the woman switches to adult, and the guy's all angry and confused and whatever. And there's certain types of games, right? The games people play. Again, this is huge in the 60s. People love this. And you can set up games where you get the kick me game. All right. So increase awareness. You want to choose your positions in life compared with systems theory, which you'll get at some point. Redecision therapy. It's a lot about choice. Once you become aware, you're acting like a child here. And you can see in the video, if you watch the Fritz Perls one, what he's trying to do with her. And it's amazing how certain things come out of her mouth about, like at one point she starts saying, yeah, you're talking to me you're making me feel like I was a child again. She's acting very like a child. And then, yeah, so you got to watch that, with the Gestalt stuff, what he's trying to do with her. It relates to some of this stuff too. But basically, he's trying to get her to choose to be a certain way. the injunctions part, I'm going to pause this for a second. Yeah, so the part that I always liked was the injunctions part, and I don't think the chapter mentions them, but you get certain messages and you live by them, right? Like don't feel things. Like this, the author of the book who talked about feeling angry and wasn't okay with that is living by an injunction he got from his parents, like don't get angry. Anyway, but the book goes into more detail about the life positions. I'm okay, you're okay. This stuff really like got into the common language too, and just fit with the whole 60s also. That you have certain ways you live your life and things you try to maintain. Like I'm okay, but you're not. So that it guides your behavior. Like, well, I can take advantage of you. They bring up, I think, some of the sociopath stuff. But the book talks a little bit about what kind of person lives by each of those variations. I'm okay, you're okay, which is the ideal one. Like I accept you the way you are. I accept me the way I am. And I think some of those games set up to recreate or keep you in those life positions is the bottom line. So read the chapter or look at it again to see how that connection's made, because I think that's the bottom line to a lot of this stuff, that your life position, which needs to be addressed in counseling. All right, let's go back. So I think basically they're going to make you aware of the games you're playing, which of the parent-child adult things you're doing, when you're doing them, and why it's causing you problem. But you want to choose your life position. Right? You want to choose when you're a child, and when you're an adult, and when you're a parent, and knowing how to go between those things. Right? So increased consciousness, basically just making people aware of these connections, making them aware their feelings is often a part of this too, especially if they get to points where they're like, well, they're uncomfortable changing, or, this is what I did, and this had, those games, the life positions have negative effects. That's why people are in therapy. That's their theory of pathology, is that if you're playing those games, if you're doing anything other than I'm okay, you're okay, then, or playing those types of games, that they give some good, at least that one example clear, that it's causing you problems. That's the reason you're having problems, is because you're sticking with a life position and you're playing those kind of games because that's what you learned, right? So anyway, so that's it. The usual research, lack of research on this stuff, of course. The IPT is a lot of research, but I think less so on some of the transactional analysis. All right. IPT is very, like I said, very popular, and a lot of people like it. It's very common sense and easy to implement, more or less. So anyway, I think that's it. I'm going to end here, and I hope you have a good weekend. I'll talk to you next week.